We're told that our countries are divided. People having shall we say, a great divide sometimes, it seems, between how they think and understand various issues. And I was thinking about how easy it is to be influenced by what we hear, what we see on TV, or view and listen to on the internet. And then again, I was thinking about and discussing with someone how easy it is to lie to ourselves. Often with the best of intentions, like the promises that we make to ourselves that, oh, we'll get to this task or that task, or we'll get to this or that, or we're going to make this change, but never really seem to get to it. And then there's those other lies that we believe, the ways in which we're deceived that we have no idea. An area of deception that some polling reported on that really surprised me was that Ipsos did some recent polling in the last couple of years that they reported that almost 3 in 10 Canadians, 29% to be exact, of Canadian adults say they personally believe in Santa Claus. And in 2022, there was a Ipsos holiday season poll of more than 1,000 Americans found that 2 in 10, 21% said they believe in Santa Claus. And that caught my attention for sure. It was hard to believe. So I went looking further, and I found an article from London, England that referred to 2023 polls, so just a few months old, that had 38% of respondents saying that they believed in Santa Claus, with 36% admitting that they stopped believing between the ages of 5 and 10. As I said, I found those numbers hard to believe at one level, and yet in countries where education is accessible, where news is accessible, it's plentiful, it's widespread. Now, of course, Santa Claus, there is some history that he seems to be based on an actual person known as St. Nicholas, a story that goes back to the 3rd century. That seems to have some historical basis. Perhaps that's what some people mean. I don't know. I have to admit that it puzzles me that adults say that they believe this. But what I do know is that Jesus of Nazareth is firmly rooted in history. The gospel writer Mark that we've been reading and studying, he takes great pains to establish Jesus as a real person. And he talks of all these firsthand accounts of people, particularly Peter. And we've been talking and we've been covering, I guess, the beginning of Jesus' public ministry that began, of course, by being baptized by John in the Jordan. And then he's led by the Spirit into the wilderness where he is tempted by Satan. Jesus is victorious, and he goes and begins his public ministry. At least traditionally it's believed in Judea, and we know that after John dies, we read that he goes into the area, goes to the north to Galilee. And it's here that Jesus announces that the time has come, that he is the Messiah, the Savior, that he has arrived, and that he is building a spiritual kingdom in the hearts and the lives of people, that God is doing a new thing, you might say. And there is this change happening when we talk about God establishing a spiritual kingdom where God is changing the direction of how his world is run. More, that's what's written on our hearts, as opposed to just sort of laws and regulations. That he is, instead of us going our own way, building our own kingdom in our own life according to what seems best to us, what we think is true in the moment or based on our feelings, we're turning to the idea is to turn to a very different orientation and direction. Then that process is called repentance. changing direction from what seems good to us in the moment to going God's direction and believing the good news, believing that Jesus is the way. He's the truth. He leads us to ultimate reality. And Jesus leads us to a life with God. Establish that connection, that relationship. And so it goes from, you might say, the orientation goes from establishing a life according to how we think it should be at any given moment to connecting and seeking the ultimate reality that comes from God and living in that manner. Now, Mark describes what this life looks like, and it most noticeably begins with hearing this invitation. He says, "Come and follow me. Come, join me. Be my apprentice. Watch me. Listen to me. Learn from me. Come hang out. Come and learn. Join me in what I'm doing." Now, some of these men had previously met Jesus for sure. Can't say that all of them had, but I'm sure that their brothers, the ones that had told the others, and so when Jesus comes, they had an awareness. Some of them had been around Jesus. They knew some of what Jesus was about for sure. And these guys, there were two sets of brothers, right? Simon and Andrew, James and John. And it seems that they were business partners. There was a family business that they're connected with. There was hired men, hired people that they were working. And what we read is that Jesus chooses these men. He chooses to invite them. Like a scout who's building a team, Jesus chooses to invite these four men who had other things to do. They were doing well. They had things to do. It wasn't like they were just loafing around doing nothing. Jesus comes by, he sees them, he invites them, he calls them to join his team. And we're told that they drop everything, and that's exactly what they do. And he's going to demonstrate, and Mark takes the time to show us how Jesus demonstrates what it means to be on Jesus' team. The values, the activities that's involved in Jesus' team. And the first thing, of course, that Jesus mentions to these fishermen is instead of fishing for fish, they're going to be fishing for people. Fish had been their business, and now people are going to be their business. And then we get to read, Mark illustrates what that looks like with Jesus. And so we read this text from Mark chapter 1, 21 through 34. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority and not as teachers of the law. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching? And with authority! He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. Now, as soon as they had left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her. He took her hand, and he helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and the demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. And so we read that the Jesus team, Jesus with Simon and Andrew, James and John, at this point go to Capernaum. And Jesus teaches in the synagogue on a Sabbath. And what stands out for the people, Mark tells us, is that the authority with which Jesus teaches. It wasn't like the priests, who were, we might call in our language, lay leaders, and who would quote what other people say, or they might say, in my studied opinion, this is what I've read, this is what others say, da 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 da, this is what this means. Instead, Jesus spoke like the Old Testament prophets did, thus saith the Lord, with that type of authority. He wasn't looking to quote other sources of more authority or more wisdom than he was the authority. He spoke with that type of authority. That when Jesus spoke, it was deep. It was substantive. It was substance. There was something there. It was nothing light. It wasn't trivial. It was material connected to ultimate reality. It was rooted. It was grounded in God himself, right? It wasn't just something that would go out of date in a decade, as we know, 2,000 years later, right? Even science, who people love to uphold as the ultimate truth, we know you can look back at what people believed according to science 100 years ago, 50 years ago, now, a few years ago, so on, and now and into the future, it changes. The best we can do, it gathers evidence. But what Jesus gave was beyond all that, connecting his listeners to ultimate reality that comes from God himself. And then we're told that they go from there, there's a teaching, and then there is that demon that recognizes Jesus in the synagogue, demon in a person, and he recognizes Jesus, and he challenges Jesus, and you can tell the demon is afraid. He is scared. He recognizes who Jesus is. He gets it better than any of the people there, who Jesus is, and he knows and recognizes who has the authority. And the people come to realize that because Jesus drives the demon out, and they go, whoa, this person even has authority over the spirit world. Because truly, Jesus does have authority over hell itself. And so Jesus demonstrates not only an intellectual understanding of the scriptures, but this spiritual authority in teaching of the scriptures and over the unseen world. And so, of course, this captures people's attention, and people talk and people tell others, and the news spreads. So after they're done at the synagogue, they go to the home of Simon's mother-in-law, and it may have been Simon's home as well. It seems like it was, archaeology suggests it was a rather large home that actually goes on to be, they believe, the meeting place for the first church, for the first Christians, where they gathered in Capernaum. And so she's in bed with a fever, and Jesus heals her. And because it's the Sabbath, there's limitations of what people could do. But as soon as sundown comes, the people are free to engage in more activities. And so they start bringing the sick and the demon-possessed to Jesus, who Jesus heals, who Jesus sets free from these demons. And it leaves us, that's sort of where our text ends that we're looking at today. But the question I want to ask us as we think about these things, not only are you on Jesus' team, and do you recognize that no matter what your calling in terms of your work and the things that you do, that you're also in the people business, as Jesus gave evidence of. And as we think about Jesus' teaching, this idea of being connected to ultimate reality, that are you open to God's view of our world? Are you open to God exposing the lies that we tell ourselves, the ways in which we are deceived, the lies that we believe because of being influenced by the world around us? Are we open to having God change that? Do we ask God for that? Satan, of course, has been called the father of lies. So we have this, there's truth on one side, there's lies on the other. In John 8:44, right, when the devil lies, right, he, that is the devil, lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. And so it's a critical piece to our own well-being and being on the team of Jesus, right? Jesus' team, being living in ultimate reality, being living up to our potential is exposing lies, embracing truth. And so I invite us to ask God to expose the lies that we believe, how we're being influenced by things that aren't true, and confront them with God's truth, to have a desire to have a commitment to ultimate reality, that is God's reality, because truth matters, right? And one of those truths is that if you identify as a follower of Jesus today, it wasn't even initially your idea. It was God's. That you've been chosen and called and recruited for the Jesus team, right? You had the option to accept, decline. CTV reported on some research that research company had done in the importance of religion. And I believe that's the name of the company, research company. That an average of 38% of Americans stated that religion was very important to them. And 25% of Canadians said the same thing. And so that's not just Christian religion, it's all religions, whatever their particular faith was. But what was interesting for the Americans, the older the generation, the higher the percentage that said that religion was very important to them. Well, in Canada, it went the opposite direction, with the youngest generation, 18 to 34, as the highest percentage of them saying that religion was very important to them. And research company also asked them what was important and what mattered to them. And above, I just had written down here, for Canadians, what mattered more than religion to Canadians was careers, friends, family, 36, 60%, and 81% respectively. Now, for followers of Jesus, in whatever country we find ourselves, Jesus invites us to join him in what he's doing. Join him in the people business. That we all work at different jobs and we have different lifestyles, different things that are going on, different places in terms of our age and so on. But Jesus invites us to join him in what he's doing, just as he said that was his method in joining the Father in what he was doing. And Jesus, of course, is about building a spiritual kingdom of people that are dedicated to God, dedicated to ultimate reality, and that God is at work, and the Spirit will prompt us and help us see where God's at work and to join him. In this series, I talked about Henry Blackaby, the author of Experiencing God. And it was just I think, a week or two ago, a couple of weeks ago, that Henry Blackaby passed. His Experiencing God Bible study sold more than 8 million copies. As the update was translated into over 75 languages. But here's what he said. If there was anything to sum up that book, you might say, or his approach to ministry, he summed it up with this statement: watch to see where God is working and join him. Watch to see where God is working and join him. And his co-author, King, made this statement. He says, our human tendency is to think and act from a human-centered perspective. We often make plans and ask God to bless them. But God is the one who has the plan. So I just want to close with encouraging us to prayerfully watch, see where God is working, and join him. Thanks for joining me today.